Hi everyone, thanks for joining me for this screencast video in which we're going to take a look at a few items. The first thing I want to do is sort of finish up Article 1. We still have question 9 we had not talked about regarding the legislative branch in the United States Congress. So I want to tie up that loose end and look at the parts of the Constitution packet and finish question number 9. And then after that, I want to move into Article 2, which as you looked at the other day, really outlines the executive branch and the powers and also provisions of the presidency in this country. And all that is going to lead us to really a discussion and an assignment regarding the Electoral College. That's what we're going to focus on for the next couple days in class. So if you would, you might need to pause this video, go ahead and retrieve your parts of the U.S. Constitution packet, because we're going to go over those questions, number 9 in Article 1, and then 1 through 5 in Article 2. So if you need to pause the video, that's fine, but go ahead and grab it, whether it's an electronic or hard copy. So the first thing I want to do take a look at today and complete is let's take a look at question number 9 regarding the legislative branch. If I go back here to our PowerPoint on the U.S. Constitution. With Article 1, we've looked at already how Congress organizes, the two houses of our bicameral legislature. We looked at some basic operational organization aspects of it and the powers of Congress. We spent some time, too, to take a look at the difference between expressed and enumerated powers of Congress, those that are specifically listed in the Constitution, versus the implied or unenumerated powers that are created by that elastic clause, and why that can be so controversial and has been throughout U.S. history. The next thing I want to take a look at to finish Article 1 up is to take a look at question number 9. It says, what civil liberty protections are really afforded under Article 1 regarding Congress's power? And a lot of you had down, Congress cannot give titles of nobility like king or queen or duke or duchess. That was something that was a really positive result of the American Revolutionary War. But that's not really a civil liberty protection. So to look at that, there are couple vocab terms you want to have down regarding powers denied to Congress, which protects your civil liberties and rights. So habeas corpus I want to talk about, and then bills of attainder and ex post facto. So habeas corpus, its literal translation means to have or to hold or produce the body. So what this essentially means is that everybody in this country has the right that if you are arrested or if you are detained and jailed by the government, you have the right that they have to bring you to court and they have to tell you why you are there, what are your charges against you, what is the evidence against you, and give you a right to due process in a trial. And again, we're going to take a look at the Bill of Rights coming up. The Sixth Amendment affords every American a right to a fair, speedy public trial. So again, that's habeas corpus. That's your right. A lot of times that, if you have a prisoner that was convicted of a crime that believes that they are innocent, they will appeal their case on a habeas corpus provision, meaning that the government has to prove why they're still in jail. But the exception to this, if you read the Constitution very carefully, it says it can be suspended. This is an important aspect of habeas corpus to be recognized, that it can be suspended if there is a time of rebellion or invasion. So what this means is if they could justify this is a rebellion or invasion and for overall national security, public safety, they need to jail you without telling you your charges or bringing you to court, they can do that, Congress. And there's been a couple of times this has happened in U.S. history. The first and probably most controversial was actually by President Abraham Lincoln during the American Civil War. He had thousands, roughly around 13,000, that were jailed, and he suspended the writ of habeas corpus. Most of these people, it was not because they had done something that was criminally wrong. It was just really a freedom of speech issue. These people did not support Lincoln and his acts as president, which were pretty oppressive and restrictive during the American Civil War. So it was really them, publishing in newspapers and pamphlets and making speeches that were not in aligned with Lincoln and what he was doing. And therefore, he said during a time of rebellion, which it was, with the southern states forming the Confederacy and leaving the Union, therefore he had the right to spend the writ of habeas corpus and jails over 10,000 people, puts them in jail, doesn't give most of them a trial, doesn't even tell them why they're there for the duration of the war, which is almost about 5 years. Now, this was controversial. It was controversial because obviously in Article 1 we're talking that it gives about Congress, and that it gives the right to Congress to suspend the writ of habeas corpus in a time of rebellion or invasion. And actually during the American Civil War, Lincoln took it upon himself to do it without consulting Congress, as just basically an act of the presidency. So that was one thing that even today many historians debate on: did he have the right to do that? We've also seen the suspension of habeas corpus happen again, unfortunately, in U.S. history. This will be something we cover in this class, but during World War II, you probably have heard of Japanese internment camps. We basically round up Japanese Americans, both native-born and foreign-born, and we detain them. After Pearl Harbor, we feel we can't trust that population. And then again, post 9/11, there's a number of suspected terrorists we suspend the writ of habeas corpus for, and we'll detain them in a number of detention facilities. The most famous is Guantanamo Bay in Cuba. So again, this is something that is afforded to you. You just can't be rounded up by government, hauled off, sent off to a detention center without a trial, without knowing what you've done wrong, unless they suspend the writ in a time of rebellion or invasion, which has been done in our history. The next thing is that it addresses illegal punishments. So please write down bills of attainder and ex post facto laws. So starting with bills of attainder, Congress cannot pass a bill or a law that bills of attainder simply mean will punish you without a trial. They can never do that. They can't cut corners. So they can't say that this is an illegal act, and if you're suspected of committing this illegal act, that you'll never get a trial, you'll never get due process. They can't do that. Okay, everybody is afforded that. The next one is ex post facto laws. And ex post facto laws means that Congress cannot create a law which will punish an act before it was made illegal. So, an example of this is, let's say now on federal highways, they have made the use of cell phones on these federal highways illegal. I can't text, I can't talk on them. Well, let's say that bill starts effective January 1st, okay? January 1st of a given year, it's now illegal on a federal highway to talk or text on your cell phone. But let's say Mrs. Banis, about a few months prior, in the summer prior to this bill actually going into law and taking effect, I committed that offense. It wasn't a crime at the time, okay? So I probably just got a stern warning, told it was unsafe, but then I went about my way. They cannot now pass a law several months later saying that that act is criminalized, and now I'm going to be prosecuted or fined or jailed for that offense. That's ex post facto law, okay? They have to give an effective date that starting January 1st of a given year, this activity is now legal. And if you commit that act or activity afterwards, you then would be facing punishment. But they can't go back previously before it was not made illegal and punish you for that. So, again, these are how your civil liberties are protected. And Congress, as we looked at, has a lot of powers listed in the Constitution, as well as implied powers that they can also create, but they can't trample on your rights given these. So now transitioning, let's take a look at Article 2. And Article 2 highlights the executive branch, the presidency of the United States. So we're going to take a look at that for the next couple of days and really study too what the president does, as well as how the president is elected through the Electoral College. So, first of all, okay, Section 1 highlights term of office. The president shall hold office for a 4-year term. Now, previously, before the gentleman that I have there on the screen was president, there were no term limits. You could run for as many 4-year terms as you wished. And really, it was President George Washington, our first president of our nation, who really did not like how there weren't term limits. So he served 2 terms and basically said that that's all a president should hold. And every president up until FDR, seen there, really honored that 2 term precedent until FDR. FDR will break the 2 term precedent. He will actually be elected for 4 consecutive terms starting in 1932 when he's first elected. He will die in 1945, okay, during his 4th term in office, but he will be elected to 4 consecutive terms. And the reason for this, as we'll look at in class, was we were in the Great Depression and then World War II started. So I really think his really well respected leadership is what people really desired during that time period, and that's what got him in office and kept him in office. But this sparked outrage, especially from the conservative and more Republican side of the aisle, and that's why the 22nd Amendment is passed in 1947, which gives the presidency term limits. So today, after that 22nd Amendment was passed, presidents can only serve 2 4-year terms consecutively. If a president serves his 8 years and then wants to take 4 years off and then run again for another non consecutive term, they can do that. Also, the 22nd Amendment says the most a president can serve consecutively is 10 years. And you might be thinking, wait a minute, Banis, this doesn't make any sense. You just said 2 4-year terms. That's 8 years. But they allow for 10 to be the total consecutive term years. Because what if a president was VP before they became president? What if a VP, their president they were serving under resigned or died while in office, they took over, they would be allowed to carry out 2 of that president's terms and then 8 years of their own. So the max is actually 10 years. The other thing is very quickly qualifications. Unlike the other offices within Congress and also the judicial branch, you have to be a natural or native born American citizen, born in the United States. There's been discussions about changing this or amending this, but they've gone really nowhere. Many Americans feel that is important. You have to be 35 years old or older and be a resident in the United States for 14 years. So if you were a diplomat, let's say, and you were serving in France or in Colombia, they want to see that you've been living in the United States for 14 years because you should be able to recognize what is going on in the United States. What are our issues? What are our problems, to best serve the country as president. The next question talks about how the president is elected. And unlike every other office, when you're going to vote for an official, whether it's governor or whether it's a mayor or a senator or representative or a township council member, every other position in this country politically is elected through the popular vote, the direct vote of the people. But we do it a little bit differently for the presidency. And we're going to come back to this in just a second and talk a little bit more about the Electoral College. So let's hold off on that and we'll come back in just a second. The next question is going to talk about presidential impeachments. And again, we kind of talked about impeachments already in Article 1 with the legislative branch. The legislative branch, starting with the House of Representatives, can impeach a president. And impeachment means, again, that you are accused of a crime, okay, not necessarily removed from office. And we talked about how in our country's history, we have had 3 presidents to date impeached, and they're listed there. Again, all so far have been found not guilty of those impeachment charges, but they were formally charged by the House, but the Senate trial found them innocent. So they were able to remain in office. This actually spells out in Article 2 what constitutes the impeachment of a president. So it says that president, vice president, and other civil officers of the United States shall be removed if convicted for treason, bribery, other high crimes, and misdemeanors. So, what I want to point out about this, and where this has been a sticky point in U.S. history, even recently, is okay, treason's pretty clear cut, bribery's pretty clear cut, but what does other high crimes and misdemeanors mean? Well, we don't know. This is where the founding fathers had really left it open for interpretation. Again, this is something that is very subjective. It does allow for some flexibility in that if a president does something wrong, again, it's kind of wide open for the country at the time to deem what is appropriate or inappropriate behavior for a president. But again, it's not clearly spelled out why a president should be impeached. And that at time causes a lot of debate and turmoil in our country. The next thing is the powers that are afforded to the president. There's really seven main roles the president has, and we're going to be breaking these down with a project coming up in just a few days. So the president is the chief executive. They're the one that carries out the laws. Congress makes the laws. The courts clarify or interpret the laws, but the president's job is to make sure that laws are faithfully executed. And that's probably their most important job. The next job is commander in chief of the armed forces. The president, we've had presidents that have had little to no military experience at all in this country, and they are absolutely the commander and the number one person that's going to call the shots, especially during a time of war. And that sometimes can be controversial, but in this class, we're going to look at why the founding fathers did it that way, and why there are some safeguards in giving that much power to one person, the president. The next one is chief legislature. We kind of talked about this with the bill to law process of how the president himself or herself cannot introduce legislation, but can pressure or can ask that a supporting member of Congress, a senator or a rep, okay, will propose legislation that they support as president. Another one is chief diplomat. They are sort of our spokesperson to foreign countries. They deal with foreign countries and foreign officials. The next one is economic planner. That's definitely timely right now, given all the economic impact and outcome that we're being seeing too because of COVID recently in this country. Also, party leader, whatever political party they are from, they represent that party and want to keep that party in power. And lastly, is head of state. They sort of symbolize what it is to be an American, and they symbolize that to us and the rest of the world. So, again, we're going to be going over and breaking these down a little bit more specifically coming up in a few lessons. The next question you had was also regarding the powers of the president and what powers they actually share with the Senate, the upper house. So, what we call the powers that the president shares with the United States Senate is something called advice and consent. It's specifically, spelled out in the Constitution that the U.S. Senate it gives advice and consent to the president and their decisions. And the big one here are treaties and appointments. The Senate has to give a 2/3 vote approval for any treaty that the president creates with a foreign country. So if it's a trade treaty, or a lot of times it's treaties that might end wars or conflicts with a foreign country, that has to go through the Senate. We don't give all of that power to just one person in the presidency. The Senate gets to check that. So that is a check and balance. The next one, too, is appointments. The president can appoint judges to the Supreme Court, ambassadors, and also department heads for their cabinet, like Department of Justice or Department of Agriculture or Transportation. All of these individuals have to get approval from the Senate. Again, that advice and consent. We don't want to see presidents that just are going to appoint their friends or people that might not have the best knowledge or ideas for that office. So therefore, it's another example of checks and balances the president shares with just the Senate. Again, it's not the House of Representatives, it's just the Senate, the upper house, that gives advice and consent. So the next thing I mentioned is, let's go back and let's talk about the Electoral College. So, how the president elected, as I mentioned before, is very different, and it's a long, strung out process that goes a lot further than just election day in November. The president shall be elected by the Electoral College, and each state is going to play a major role in that. As if you've watched current events, you've seen in just the previous election we just had. So let's break this down a little bit more. The first thing is to understand, okay, that each state has a specific number of electoral votes. It's the number of each state's reps plus their senators, and that will give us a grand total for each state and then just the overall national total of electoral votes. Okay, again, the House of Representatives is based on population. That can change with the census every 10 years, and you're guaranteed at least one rep. The senators, you obviously have two per state. And so that gives us the grand total of 538. You're probably thinking, wait a minute, Banis, you can't do math. Well, actually, it is 538 because not so long ago with the 23rd Amendment, let me go back one here, the District of Columbia, which is now a territory, not a state, it has now a high permanent residential population. But previously people might have lived in another state but just went to DC for work. More people are permanent residents of DC, which is a territory. And they said, well, wait a minute, we don't get a say in the presidency. And so the 23rd Amendment gives them that say. Okay, Columbia is the only territory which is going to be allowed electoral votes, and they get 3. So that gives us the grand total of 538. So now let's take a look at, okay, some other basic questions. Why do we have the Electoral College system? Who decides who these electors are? How does each state's Electoral College votes work? So most textbooks aren't really too strong in this area when talking about the Electoral College, and your textbook is definitely one of them. So I want to stop here. And for the assignment I would like you to work on, let's go to our Canvas course. So what I would like you to complete and submit for today's assignment is right here. It's the Electoral College web quest. So if you want to click on this assignment here, it's worth 10 points. The first thing I have for you here is a short video. I believe it's under 10 minutes long, from TED Ed. It is an educational TED Talk, sort of animated video about the Electoral College. So if you really don't have a strong background in the Electoral College, and even if you do and want to have a refresher, I absolutely recommend that you watch that quick video. There's no questions for it or anything. Just take a look. If you want to take down notes, that's fine, but you're not required. But what you are going to complete is this worksheet right here. So we want to pull up the Electoral College web quest document. And it's a Google Doc that's going to look like this. Okay, make a copy of it. And so what I'm going to have you do, again, it's the frequently asked questions about the Electoral College that most textbooks do not answer, including your textbook. So there are a number of links here where you're going to get the questions. And I start out with basically, where do these terms come from? Why do we have the Electoral College? So you're going to read about the Founding Fathers and why they felt that was important. Why don't we just elect it through the popular vote? The next one is going to take a look at who are the electors from each state. I would like you to take a look at that. How do we look at who they are, who selects them, and what's the qualifications you need to be in order to be elector? The next question, number 3, is just a timeline of important dates. Again, these dates were not so far off. Take a look at what happens. What is sort of the timeline of events in the Electoral College? Again, it's a lot more strung out than just having a popular vote and deciding after that popular vote who the president is. The next one is territories. Can U.S. territories vote for the president? Okay, take a look at that. And also, there's different ways of, for number five, states can vote in the Electoral College. There's something called a winner takes all rule and proportional voting. So please tell me, what do they mean and which states follow which rule? Question six, we'll talk about the number to get to win the presidency out of the 538 electoral votes is 270. But what happens if no presidential candidate gets that number 270? That has happened a few times in US history. So who decides who's the winner of the presidency then? Take a look at that. And then lastly, each state has a number of electors, and they're supposed to vote towards the will of the popular vote, what the people want. But is that actually something that's in stone? Is that a legal requirement? So, question number seven is going to take a look at that. Something called faithless electors. Do they have to vote for the will of the people? So, please complete those questions. I will say, in order to get the full 10 points, a lot of these questions have, like question number seven, multiple questions. Please make sure you're answering to the best of your ability all questions in that question. Some of them are multiple parts to get full credit. And then lastly, down here, what do you have questions about regarding the Electoral College? This is sort of gauge sort of where we're going next and going further into the process. So that's what I have for you. Again, when you're done, please submit it to this assignment, that web quest. And if you have any questions at all, please let me know. Don't hesitate to email me. Take care, everyone.